The fire's doing what it always does. It talks a little, then it goes quiet. The night sits close, like a coat on your shoulders. The wood smells warm, even before you touch it. I can hear you breathing over there. That's enough. I knew a man once named Thomas. Not a fine name for a story, I suppose. Just a plain name. The kind you hear called across a yard, or said in a doorway when supper is on the table. I spent a part of my life beside him, not as family, not as a best friend like boys talk about when they are young, but as the sort of clothes you get when days keep putting you in the same place and you learn the shape of another person without meaning to. He had hands that always looked a little raw, even when they were clean. We worked in the same shop for a few years, a small place that smelled of oil and iron, and when the morning shift started, you could hear the first machines begin, one by one, like a row of old men clearing their throats. The boss was called Mr. Reed, and he liked things quiet, not because he was gentle, but because he thought noise meant trouble. So we worked with our heads down. You learned to speak with looks and small nods. Thomas had a way of standing that made him seem taller than he was. Not stiff, just steady. If you asked him something, he would look at you for a moment before he answered, like he was checking the question to see if it was worth the air it would take. And when he did answer, he used simple words. He did not dress up his thoughts. You could trust him to say what he meant, and nothing more. We did not meet in any grand way. I came into the shop because I needed the work. My wife was pregnant then, and money had a way of leaving my hands faster than I could earn it. I walked in with my hat in my hand, and Mr. Reed looked at me like he was weighing a sack of grain. Thomas was at a bench near the window, and he did not even look up at first. Then, when Mr. Reed turned away, Thomas glanced over and gave me a small nod, not friendly, not cold, just a nod that said, "Yes, you are here now." That was the beginning. The shop had a stove in the corner that never did quite enough in winter. You would stand near it at break, turning your hands toward it, and you could smell damp wool and tobacco and the sharp bite of cold air that came in every time the door opened. Thomas would take his lunch out of a tin and set it on the bench, like it was part of the work. Bread, sometimes a bit of cheese, sometimes nothing but a thick slice of meat wrapped in paper. He ate slow. He did not talk much while he ate. He looked at his hands as if he was checking them for damage, the way a man might check a tool. After work, we would sometimes walk the same way, not because we planned it. The road only went where it went. We would step out into the late light, the sky already going pale in winter, and our breath would show in front of us. Thomas lived in a rented room behind a widow's house. I lived across town in a small place with a narrow yard. Our paths stayed together for a while, then split at the corner by the church. Some evenings, when it was not too late, Thomas would stop at a little place that sold beer and stew. It was not a loud bar, more like a room where men sat and tried to rest their minds. The walls were stained with smoke, and there was always someone wiping a glass with the same rag. If I was with him, he would nod at the owner, and we would sit in a corner where the draft did not reach. Thomas drank one beer most times. He did not chase the bottom of the glass like some men did. He would take a sip, set it down, and then stare at the table for a while, as if the table had a pattern worth studying. He told me about his mother once, just a little. She lived out in the country, and he sent her money when he could. He did not say he loved her. He did not say he worried. He just said, "She's getting on." And then he looked at the table, as if the table needed his attention. I understood. Men in those days did not often show their hearts in words. We showed them by doing things like sending money, like fixing a broken latch, like showing up. There was a woman I was seeing then, not my wife. That is a thing I do not say with pride, and I do not dress it up. My marriage had grown thin in places. My wife and I were tired. We were young and we were already tired. A baby coming can do that to you. It can make you feel like you are walking with a sack on your back, and the sack is full of good things and fear all at once. The woman's name was Mary. She worked at the laundry by the river, and her hands were red from hot water. She was kind in a quiet way. She did not laugh loud. She did not flirt like a girl in a dance hall. She spoke plain, like Thomas. I met her when I was picking up shirts, and she asked me if the name on the tag was mine. I said yes, and she said, "These buttons are loose," and she pointed at my cuff. It was such a small thing to notice, and it made my chest feel strange. Mary and I did not make promises. We did not talk about running away or starting new. We had small moments. We would stand by the river for a few minutes after her shift, and she would hold her coat closed with one hand while she talked. Or we would sit on a bench outside the laundry, and she would take her shoes off and rub her feet, and the air would smell of soap and wet cloth. We never made a plan for a life. We did not even say the word love. We just kept meeting, and the meetings became part of the week, like payday or Sunday. Thomas knew, I think. He never said he knew. He never asked. But once, in the shop, when Mary had come by at noon to bring me a small parcel of food because I had forgotten my lunch, Thomas watched her walk away. He did not stare. He just looked. And then he looked back at me, and he said, "Careful." That was all. It was not a warning like a father gives a boy. It was not a threat. It was a simple word, like you say when you see someone carrying a hot pan. Careful, the pan can burn you. Careful, you can spill it. Careful, you might drop it and lose what you were trying to bring. I did not answer him. I nodded. We went on with the work. The machines kept their steady noise. The day moved like it always did. Mary and I carried on through one spring and into summer. my wife found out. One evening, she looked at my face and asked, "Who is she?" I tried to lie, and then I didn't. After that, my days changed. I slept in the back room for a while. I ate meals in silence. The baby cried at night, and my wife would walk the floor, and I would listen to her steps and feel like I was outside my own life. Mary stopped meeting me. She did not send a note. She did not come by the laundry. She was not cruel. She was just done. Thomas did not change how he treated me. That is something I remember clearly. He did not act like he had taken a side. He did not offer advice. He did not scold. He just kept working beside me. Sometimes, at break, he would slide his tin toward me and say, "Take a bit." If he had extra, I would take it and nod, and that would be the whole conversation. Then one day, near the end of summer, Thomas came in with his face set in a different way. He moved slower. He did not say much at all. At lunch, he ate nothing. After the shift, he walked with me past the church corner and kept going past the place where he usually turned. I did not ask, we just walked. The evening light was yellow and flat. A few boys were throwing stones at a can. A woman was shaking a rug from a window. Thomas stopped by the river and looked down at it. It was low, and a bit of trash had caught on a branch near the bank. He watched the water for a long time. Then he said, "My mother's gone." That was all. No long speech, no tears. He said it like he was reading a line from a letter. I stood there, not knowing what to do with my hands. I said I was sorry. It sounded small, like the words had shrunk in my mouth. He nodded once. He did not look at me. He kept looking at the water. After a while, he said he had to go out there, to the country, for the burial. He would be gone a few days. He said Mr. Reed already knew. Then he started walking again, and this time he did turn where he usually did, and he went down the side street toward his rented room, and I watched his back until he was gone. He came back 3 days later. He looked more tired, like sleep had not been enough. He worked the whole shift without a break, and Mr. Reed did not say a word. At the end of the day, Thomas cleaned his bench carefully, slower than usual. He wiped down the tools. He put things in their places, like he was making the bench ready for someone else. Then he told Mr. Reed he was leaving. It was sudden to me, even though he must have been thinking about it. Mr. Reed frowned. He asked where Thomas was going. Thomas said he was going to his mother's place. Mr. Reed said it was not much of a place. Thomas said it was still hers. The next morning, Thomas was gone. For a long time, that was it. No letters, no news. People moved on. The shop kept running. The stove kept smoking in winter. My wife and I patched our marriage in a way that was not pretty, but was real enough to keep going. The baby grew into a child. Days stacked on days. Then, years later, I saw Thomas again by chance. I was in the market buying potatoes. The air smelled of apples and wet ground. I heard someone behind me say my name, not loud, just clear. I turned, and there he was, older, wider in the shoulders, with a bit of gray in his hair. He looked at me like he was checking I was real. Then he gave me the same small nod he had given me the first day in the shop. He asked how I was. I said, "I'm getting on." He said, "So am I." We stood there with sacks in our hands. People walked around us. A wagon creaked by. A woman called out prices for eggs. Thomas said he was in town to sell some things from the farm, a bit of produce, a few jars of preserves. He said it was hard work, but it was his. I asked if he was married. He said no. He said he had not found a woman who wanted that life with him. He said it without complaint. I asked if he was lonely. He looked away and said, "Some days." That was all he gave me. I wanted to tell him about Mary, about my wife, about the years that had gone by, but the words felt heavy. We did not have the kind of friendship where you poured your life into another man's hands. We had shared hours, shared work, shared quiet. That was what we had. We walked together for a short way, and he told me he still thought about the shop sometimes. The sound of the machines, the feel of the tools. I told him I still worked there. He shook his head as if that was both normal and strange. At the corner where we would have split years ago, he stopped. He shifted his sack from one hand to the other. He said, "You were a good worker." I said, "He was too." He nodded. Then he said, "Careful." Again, the same word, and I nodded. He walked off, and I watched him go, and I knew I would probably not see him again, and I was right. I never did. Still, when I think back, I do not think of some big moment between us. I think of the way we stood by the stove and warmed our hands, not talking, just breathing in the smoke and heat, and the way he slid his tin toward me on days when my stomach was tight, and the way he said "careful" like a man handing you a tool, simple, solid, meant to be used. I worked in a place years later where everything felt slower than it does now. I do not mean the world was different in some grand way. People still hurried sometimes. There were still bills and sickness and bad weather. But there was a stretch in my life when I lived in a town where the days had space in them, and you could feel the hours passing because nothing pushed you along. It was after my children had grown a bit, after the hardest years of crying babies and scraped knees and hungry mouths had eased, and I had taken work in a small town outside the city. The job was not in a shop with machines. It was at a storehouse by the train line, a place where grain and feed were stacked, where sacks were counted and signed for, where the biggest sound was the roll of a cartwheel and the far whistle of a train. I rented a small house there for my family. It had a narrow kitchen and a yard with a patch of grass that tried its best. There was a fence that leaned a little. There was a tree that gave shade in summer. It was not much, but it was ours for those years. What I remember most about that time is not a big event. It is the way mornings began. The light would come in through the thin curtains, soft and early, and my wife, Sarah, would already be up, not because she was restless, but because she liked to move slow before the day asked for anything. She would set a pot on the stove and let water warm. She would cut bread with a knife that had a worn handle. The sound of the knife on the board was quiet, like someone tapping a finger. The children would still be asleep, wrapped in their blankets, their hair stuck out in strange ways. I would sit at the table, not yet fully awake, and Sarah would set a cup in front of me. Not coffee every day. Sometimes it was just warm water with a little sugar, or tea when we could get it. She would sit down across from me and not say much at first. She would look out the window as if she was reading the yard. Outside, the town would wake up slowly. You could hear a rooster somewhere, not close, but clear. You could hear a man opening a gate. A dog would trot past, nose down, doing its morning work. There was no rush. Even the trains, when they came, did not feel rushed. They came on their schedule, and you heard them before you saw them, and by the time they passed, you had already accepted them. At the storehouse, the work was steady, but not frantic. Men came in with wagons. We lifted sacks. We checked papers. We wrote numbers. We tied strings. We swept the floor at the end of the day. There were long stretches where nothing arrived, and you could stand in the doorway and watch dust float in the air, and the place felt still. One of the men there was named Henry. He was older than me by maybe 10 years, and he had a face like an old boot, creased and tough. He liked to talk, but not about big ideas. He talked about weather, about crops, about who had bought a new cow. He would tell the same story twice in 1 week and not notice. I did not mind. The stories were not the point. The talking was the point. It filled the time in a gentle way. At noon, we would sit on crates and eat. Someone might pass around a jar of pickles, and we would listen to the wind against the boards and the far whistle of a train. In the evenings, I would walk home along the track. The stones by the rail would crunch under my boots. The sun would go down behind the fields, and the sky would turn a plain pink and then fade. Sometimes a child would be playing in a yard, and you could hear their laughter. Not loud, just the sound of a small body moving through air. Sarah would be in the kitchen, stirring something. Not fancy meals, beans, potatoes, a bit of meat when we had it. The smell would fill the small house. She would wipe her hands on her apron and kiss me on the cheek without making a show of it. The children would crowd around me, talking at once, showing me a stick they found, or a stone, or a drawing. I would sit down and let the noise wash over me. After supper, there was time. That is the strange thing to say, but it is true. There was time to sit, time to mend a shirt, Time for Sarah to comb her hair slowly by the lamp. Time for me to take a piece of wood and carve a small toy for the children. Nothing good, just a little horse shape, rough and plain. Time for the children to play a game on the floor that made no sense but made them happy. Sometimes we would sit on the step outside. The air would cool. The smell of earth would rise. The town would go quiet, not dead quiet, but the kind of quiet where you can hear a window being shut 2 houses away. Sarah would sit with her hands in her lap. I would sit with my back against the doorframe. We would watch the sky darken. We did not talk about our feelings. We did not talk about the past much. We talked about small things, like whether the fence needed fixing, or whether we should plant beans near the tree. Sarah would tell me that Mrs. Carter down the street had baked bread and that it smelled so good she had to stop herself from going over and asking for a slice. I would tell her that Henry had said the winter might be hard because the geese had come early. She would nod like that was important news. There was a little store in town run by a woman named Emily. She was not young, not old, somewhere in the middle, and she had eyes that seemed to see what you needed before you said it. When you walked in, a small bell would ring. Emily would look up from her book or her sewing and say, "Morning" or "evening," and that was all. She did not try to sell you things you did not need. She did not chatter to fill the room. She would wrap your purchase in paper and tie it with string, slow and neat. Sometimes Sarah would send me there for flour or soap. I would walk in and Emily would already have the flour sack behind the counter. She would slide it toward me. I would pay. She would count the coins carefully, not because she mistrusted, but because that was the way she did it. She would set the coins in the drawer in a tidy row. Then she would hand me the change. Her hands were clean and steady. Once, in late fall, I came in while she was sweeping the floor. She leaned the broom against the wall and wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. She looked tired. She said, "Hard week." I asked why. She said, "People want credit." She said it like she was stating a fact about the weather. I nodded. I understood that town did not have much money. People paid when they could. Emily had to decide who to trust. It was not a warm choice. It was just a choice. I stood there a moment, holding a sack of salt, and I saw her glance toward the window where the light was fading. The glass had a thin layer of dust. Outside, the street was empty. She looked like she wanted to close early, but felt she could not. I said, without thinking much, "If you need help carrying things from the wagon, I can come by." It was a simple offer. I did not mean it as anything else. She looked at me, and for a second her face softened. Then she nodded once and said, "All right." So, for a while, I helped her once a week, usually on the day the delivery came. I would come after my work, and the wagon would be there with boxes and sacks. Emily would stand with a pencil, checking items off a list. I would lift the boxes and carry them into the back room. The back room smelled of paper and dry goods. There was a narrow shelf with jars. There was always a bit of flour dust on the floor. Emily would say, "That goes there," or "Put that on the lower shelf," and I would do it. We did not talk much. It was not a courtship. It was not secret meetings. It was just two people sharing a small job. Sometimes she would hand me a cup of water, and I would drink it and hand it back. Sometimes she would say, "Thank you," in a voice that was small but firm. I remember one evening when the delivery was late and it was already dark. Emily lit a lamp in the back room. The flame made the shadows jump. The store out front was empty. Outside, the wind was pushing against the building. Emily stood near the shelves, holding the list. She squinted in the lamplight. She said, "Can't read this in the dark." I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because it was true. She smiled, just a small lift at the corner of her mouth. Then she set the list down and rubbed her eyes with her fingers, like she was trying to push the tiredness away. In that moment, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not desire, not longing, just a simple closeness to another human being doing the same work, standing in the same small room, sharing the same weak light. It made the world feel less heavy. I did not act on it. I did not speak it. I went home. Sarah was there, and the children were there, and my life was my life. Still, I remember that back room and the lamp and Emily rubbing her eyes. And I remember it because it was part of that slow time when small things had room to be noticed. Winter came, and the days got shorter. We ate by lamplight more often. The storehouse work slowed. Sometimes there was nothing to do for an hour, and you could sit and mend a glove or sharpen a pencil. Henry would hum to himself. Another man would stare at the door as if the train might come through it. At home, Sarah would knit or sew. The children would play quiet games because the cold made them tired. I would sit by the stove, not the one here, a different one, and I would watch the fire and listen to the small sounds in the house, the crack of wood, the scrape of a chair, the soft cough of a child in sleep. There were evenings when the snow fell, slow and steady, and the whole town seemed to soften. The world outside was white and dim, and inside the lamp made a warm circle. Sarah would pour soup into bowls, and the steam would rise, and the smell would be simple and good. That stretch did not last forever. Nothing does. Work changed. The town changed. We moved back toward the city when the children needed schooling and the storehouse job ended. The city was louder. It always is. Even the quiet corners have noise in them, but that slow time stayed in me. This reminds me of one moment that does not seem to change, no matter how many times I put my mind back on it. It is not a grand moment. It is not the kind you would write down in a book. It is just a small piece of life that has stayed clear while other things have blurred. It was in that same town before we moved on a late winter afternoon. The snow had stopped falling and the sky was a flat gray. The air was cold enough to sting your nose. I had been at the storehouse all day, and my boots were wet from walking through slush. My hands smelled of grain, dust, and rope. I was walking home, and I took the longer path by the train line because the main street had turned to mud. The track ran straight for a while, and the fields on either side were covered in a thin crust of snow. The wind moved over it, making small lines. Everything looked plain. Ahead of me, I saw someone standing near the crossing, not on the track, but near the post where a lantern hung. It was a woman. She had a scarf up over her mouth, and her coat was buttoned high. She was holding a small bundle close to her chest. At first, I thought it was a parcel, but as I got closer, I saw it was a baby, wrapped tight, only the top of the head showing under a knit cap. The woman turned a little, and I saw her face. It was Anna. She lived in a small house 2 streets over. I did not know her well. I had seen her at the church door, at the market, once, at Emily's store. She was married to a man who worked on the trains, and he was away often. People said she was quiet. They said she kept to herself. I had no reason to know much more, but there she was, standing in the cold, waiting. The crossing gate was up. No train was near. Still she waited, as if waiting was part of the place. I slowed as I came near, not wanting to startle her. I could hear the soft sound of the baby breathing, a tiny breath, and the rustle of Anna's coat as she shifted her weight. She was looking down the track, eyes narrowed against the wind. I stopped a few steps away and I said, "Afternoon," because it was the simplest thing to say. She turned her head toward me. Her eyes were tired. Her cheeks were red from cold. She nodded once. She did not smile. We stood there a moment, 2 people with no reason to be together in that spot. The wind blew again, and Anna pulled the scarf tighter with her free hand. The baby made a small sound, not crying, just a soft fuss. Anna rocked the bundle, hardly moving, just a slight shift, like the baby was part of her own body. I said, waiting on the train. It was a foolish question, maybe, but it was the only guess I had. She nodded again and said, yes. Her voice was quiet. It sounded like she had not used it much that day. I looked down the track. I could not hear anything. No whistle, no rumble. I said, "It'll come." She did not answer. She kept looking. Then, after a while, she said, "He said he would be on the early one." She did not say the man's name. She did not say her husband. She just said he, like the word was enough to hold the whole thing. I nodded. I did not know what else to do. The cold worked its way into my gloves. My boots pressed into the slush. The baby made another small sound, and Anna rocked again. Her eyes stayed on the track, but her face looked far away, as if she was looking at something that was not there yet. And then, in the distance, we heard it. Not loud at first, a low sound, like thunder, but steady. Anna's shoulders lifted slightly. She leaned forward a little, like her body knew the sound before her mind did. The train came around the bend, still far off, a dark shape against the gray. The lantern on the post did not swing, but the wind seemed to pause for a second, like it was listening to. The rails began to hum under the snow, a faint vibration you could feel in your feet if you stood still. Anna's eyes stayed fixed. Her mouth, under the scarf, moved a little, and I think she was counting the cars, or maybe she was saying something to herself. The baby was quiet now, as if it felt the change. The train drew closer. The engine passed with a roar that filled the air and pushed the cold back. The cars followed, clattering, the sound sharp and loud in the open fields. Snow along the track lifted in small bursts. Anna did not step forward. She did not wave. She simply stood there, holding the baby, watching each car pass, her eyes searching the windows and doors, as if her sight could reach into the moving steel. Then, a few cars back, a door slid open. A man stood there, holding the rail, his cap pulled low. It was her husband. I could tell by the way Anna's whole body changed, like a rope that had been pulled tight and then released just a little. She did not run. She did not call out. She lifted her chin, and her eyes met his. He looked down and saw her. He raised his hand, not high, just a small lift, the kind you might not notice if you were not watching for it. Anna raised her hand too, but her hand was holding the baby, so it was more like she shifted the bundle, and the movement became a wave without being one. For a second, in the middle of all that noise, it was quiet inside me. I saw her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the baby's small head under the cap, and the man's hand on the rail. It was a simple picture, no words, no big display, just that. The train did not stop at the crossing. It was passing through. Her husband was not getting off there. He was just on his way, and he had wanted her to see him, wanted to see her, even if it was only for a breath of time. The door slid shut. The cars kept moving. The last one passed, and then the sound began to fade, leaving the wind again and the empty track. Anna kept standing there for a moment after it was gone. She did not move right away. The baby made a soft sound, and she rocked it. Then she turned and began walking back toward town, slow, careful, like the ground might slip. She did not look at me again, but as she passed, she said very quietly, "Thank you." I do not know what she was thanking me for standing there, maybe, for not speaking too much, for being a witness to something that mattered to her. I watched her go. My breath came out in white puffs. The sky stayed gray. The moment stayed with me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see the train door, the man's hand, the baby bundle, Anna's eyes searching. It is always the same. It does not shift like other memories. It sits there, plain and exact. The fire has moved down a bit now. It takes longer for the wood to catch. The night feels closer at the edges. My hands know the warmth and also the cool. I can hear the small sound of the coals settling. If you like sitting here listening, you can come back another night. The fire's usually lit around this time. There's always room by the fire.